B-I-O, it's a B-I-O, B-I-O, it's a B-I-O, birdie, 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 welcome. Welcome to another virtual biology camp lecture. Today we're going to be discussing prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells. Yes, Alex, that's right. Cells are those found in organisms such as your puppy. But just keep in mind that an organism may either be unicellular or multicellular, which we're going to be discussing in this lecture. So just make sure that you take good notes. But first, let's start by discussing what is the cell theory and who came up with it. Not exactly, Alex. A theory is a widely accepted explanation to a specific phenomena. In this case, it's regarding cells, which doesn't mean that the theory was developed by someone named Cell. In fact, this theory, as are most, was developed by various scientific findings from numerous individuals. Yes, Alex, you're right. The theory was a contribution from various individuals, but there are 5 main scientists that you must make sure that you remember dating back to 1665. Yes, Alex, that far back, because that's actually when Robert Hooke was the first to identify cells using a 3-lens microscope. Glad you asked, Alex. As the years progressed, microscopes did get much better. In fact, in 1674, another scientist was able to view much more detailed cells with certain improvements that he made to these lenses. Perhaps not as detailed as that, Alex, but it was a major improvement to microscopes and scientific progress overall. Further scientific findings followed as well, including those of a scientist in 1838 in which he first noted that plants are made up of cells. It wasn't until 1839, Alex, that another scientist studied both plant and animal cells, and he came to a conclusion that all living things are made up of cells. Yes, Alex, this brings us to our 5th scientific discovery, which was in 1855, when another scientist believed that all cells came from pre-existing cells, which soon became accepted as another major principle in the cell theory. That's right, Alex. These great scientific contributions shaped the cell theory into the following 3 major principles. Number 1, all organisms are made of cells. Number 2, all existing cells are produced by other living cells. And the third, the cell is the most basic unit of life. Yes, Alex, as you've mentioned before, there are different types of cells like those found in plants or animals or even bacteria, which you referred to as germs. Well, believe it or not, Alex, despite their differences, they all share common characteristics. That's right, Alex. All cells are microscopic. Can you think of any other characteristics that they may share? Right again, Alex. All cells have certain biomolecules present, specifically nucleic acids, meaning they all carry genetic information. Good job, Alex. Cells are enclosed by a membrane, which helps keep all of their stuff inside, and it also decides what materials go in and out of the cell. Yes, that's right, Alex. Cells are not flat. They have volume, which is filled with a jello-like fluid that basically has dissolved molecular building blocks such as nucleic acids, proteins, minerals, or ions. Yes, that's right, Alex. The cytoplasm is actually where cell organelles are submerged in. Great question, Alex. Organelles are specialized structures that perform different processes within the cell. Yes, Alex, I guess that's one way of remembering what they are. These organelles are small structures inside of the cell, meaning that they are smaller than cells, and they all have very different functions. No, Alex, not all cells have organelles. In fact, that is actually a good way to distinguish between certain types of cells. And there's one major distinction that you need to know between the 2 types of cells, which is the presence or lack of a very big and important organelle. Yes, Alex, that's correct. The nucleus is sometimes seen as the main office or the brain or the boss of the cell. Basically, it is where the most important pieces of information are kept safe and made. Now, do you know what type of biomolecule I'm talking about? Yes, that's right, Alex. DNA is found in the nucleus of cells, and it is a type of biomolecule known as nucleic acid. And many cells have a nucleus, which stores this biomolecule that carries genetic information. Now, the nucleus is considered the largest, which is why it is often the most visible in a cell, and it is used as the first distinction between the 2 types of cells that you have to be familiar with, which are prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Yes, Alex, great way to remember that you have eukaryotic cells, meaning animal cells are considered eukaryotic cells.
Yes, Alex, believe it or not, we fall under the same kingdom as our puppy, which would be the kingdom Animalia, which means we both have eukaryotic animal cells. Can you think of another organism that may be considered eukaryotic cells other than animal cells? Yes, that's right, Alex. Plants have eukaryotic cells. Okay, what about prokaryotic cells? Which organisms do you think might have those? Right again, Alex, bacteria are a form of prokaryotic cells. And as we mentioned, one of the major differences between these two types of cells is the presence or lack of a nucleus. Do you know which is which? Sure, Alex, that's one way of remembering which is which. That's fine. Just keep in mind that plants don't have brains, but yet they are also eukaryotic cells that contain a nucleus. But if that image helps you remember what is so special about eukaryotic cells, then go for it. Anyways, bottom line, you just need to know that eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and prokaryotic cells do not. Great question, Alex. Prokaryotes have their nucleic acids just floating around in the cytoplasm. Now remember that we mentioned that some of these cells have membrane-bound organelles, which are structures that are in the cytoplasm and have specific jobs, also known as functions. Well, which type of cell do you think we would find these organelles in? Yes, that's correct, Alex. These membrane-bound organelles are found in eukaryotic cells and not in prokaryotic cells because they not only lack a nucleus, but also other membrane-bound organelles. Okay, Alex, now it's important to note that for the most part, prokaryotes are considered to be microscopic single-celled, also known as unicellular organisms, meaning just one of the prokaryotic cells makes up the actual organism called a bacteria. Sure, Alex, that's one way of remembering that prokaryotes are unicellular. Okay, as for eukaryotes, well, these are actually, yes, Alex, you're correct. Some eukaryotes, such as us, other animals, and plants are multicellular. However, believe it or not, there is also unicellular eukaryotes. Okay, so we know that membrane-bound organelles and the nucleus is found in eukaryotic cells and not prokaryotic, which brings us to two other distinctions regarding the two types of cells, which is the size and complexity. Let's first discuss which is smaller. Yes, Alex, you're right. Prokaryotic cells are smaller since they don't have much inside of them when compared to eukaryotic cells. Let's discuss complexity. Sure, Alex. That's one way to remember that eukaryotic cells are more complex, meaning they are composed of more things, specifically organelles, which does lead it to have a greater size. But just keep in mind that prokaryotic cells might be small and less complex, but that doesn't mean that they are less adapted to survive on Earth. We will actually discuss that in greater detail in our lecture regarding evolution. Okay, so for now, let's look at some components that give eukaryotic cells their complexity, which are their organelles. Sure, Alex, that's one way of remembering it. Just keep in mind that organelles are structures specialized to perform different functions within the cell, to basically help the cell run properly. Okay, so let's start with one that we already know, which is the nucleus. As we mentioned before, this is the largest visible organelle in a cell, and it contains genetic material inside of it. Basically, it is the control center of the cell, whose genetic material is often seen as chromatin, which are spaghetti-like structures. What biomolecule do you think this chromatin is made up of? Yes, that's right, Alex. Chromatin is made up of nucleic acids, specifically DNA. Now, the nucleus is important because it is the control center and it protects DNA by keeping out any molecules that might damage it with the help of its nuclear membrane. Now, inside of the nucleus, we also find the nucleolus, which is a dense region where tiny organelles called ribosomes are produced. Sure, Alex, if that helps you remember it. Okay, so now let's look at another cell component, which we have already discussed, and that is the cytoplasm. Yes, Alex, that's pretty much what the cytoplasm is. And you can see it as the water that fills up a pool. Okay, now let's take a look at another organelle found in the cell, which surrounds the nucleus. We call this organelle the ER. No, Alex, not that kind of ER. I'm talking about the ER found in cells, known as the endoplasmic reticulum, which has a bunch of passageways that carry proteins and other materials from one part of the cell to another. Now, the ER is pretty big, which is why we break it down into two components, the rough and the smooth ER. Yes, Alex, something like that. Basically, the rough ER gets its name because of the bumpy texture that it has due to the ribosomes that are attached to it, while the smooth ER doesn't have any ribosomes, which is why it's smooth. Good question, Alex. Ribosomes are small structures made of RNA. That's right, Alex. Ribosomes are the location in which proteins are made. And because these ribosomes are attached on the rough ER, that's why we tend to say that the rough ER helps in protein synthesis. Yes, Alex, that's a great way to look at it. But just keep in mind that some ribosomes are also found in the cytoplasm, which tend to make proteins as well, but meant for close destinations. Great question, Alex. Golgi bodies, also known as the Golgi apparatus, is the organelle that receives proteins and other materials coming from the ER. Once it receives them, it then packages them nicely and distributes them to where they're needed. I see what you did there, Alex. And yeah, that's a good way to remember what the Golgi bodies do. Then it is packaged into a nice Golgi vesicle, which is used for transport out of the cell membrane. Not exactly, Alex. Remember, some proteins are made in the free-swimming ribosomes found in the cytoplasm, and those proteins tend to stay in the cell for cellular needs. How about we move on to another organelle found in eukaryotic cells, such as lysosomes? No, Alex, I said lysosomes, not Lysol. These structures have very important jobs of cleaning up all of the waste in the cell. They basically use chemicals and enzymes to break down food and worn out cell parts, which is meant to keep the cell nice and clean. Lysosomes have membranes that enclose enzymes used to break down waste, and when it finally has finished breaking it down into essential products, it then releases them back into the cytoplasm so that the cell can reuse. Sure, Alex, if that works for you, then go with it. I just need you to remember what lysosomes do, which is to clean up the cell of waste and basically recycle it. Okay, next are vacuoles, which are structures in a cell used as a storage locker. Vacuoles may store water, food molecules, and other materials that may be needed by the cell later. Sure, Alex, let's go with that. Just keep in mind that some eukaryotic cells have small vacuoles in their cells, while others may have larger vacuoles known as central vacuoles that may be used to store large amounts of water. Yes, that's right, Alex. Plant cells have central vacuoles. Okay, now speaking of other organelles that plants have are chloroplasts. Yeah, Alex, chloroplasts play a role in sunlight absorption during photosynthesis, which results in the energy storage in carbohydrates. Now, we're definitely going to review this organelle and process in a much more detailed lecture dedicated towards cellular processes. But for now, just make sure that you remember that chloroplast is the location in which photosynthesis takes place. Okay, now comes another organelle, which is just as important, and we will also focus an entire lecture on regarding cellular processes, and that is the mitochondria, which is the location that cellular respiration takes place. Yes, Alex, the mitochondria breaks down that sugar to release the stored energy in the form of ATP. You got it, Alex. The mitochondria is often referred to as the powerhouse of the cell because it is basically the location that gives the cell its power to function by releasing ATP. Next is the cytoskeleton. Yes and no, Alex. This cytoskeleton is found in the cytoplasm, and that is what gives the cell its structure and reinforcement, similar to what our skeletal system does for our body. No, Alex, our cells don't have bones. The cytoskeleton is made out of 3 different types of tubes, ranging in size and thickness, known as microtubules, intermediate filament, and microfilament. Now, when these tubes are combined, they help give the cell a form of structure, but it is often not drawn in a cell because it's difficult to draw this intertwined system of tubes other than the occasional drawings in the outer regions of the cell. These tubes are also very similar to those seen in centrioles, which are a cylinder-shaped organelle made of short microtubules arranged in a circle. Now, centrioles are found in the centrosome, which is a small region in the cytoplasm of some eukaryotes. These organelles play a role in cell division, which we are going to discuss in later lectures. Next is the cell membrane, which we previously mentioned is important to cells in order to keep everything in and any unwanted things out. In other words, the cell membrane is selective in what goes in and out of the cell, which is why we call it a semi-permeable or selectively permeable membrane. Yeah, something like that, Alex. The cell membrane does control what goes in and out of the cell. In some cells, the cytoskeleton might form protrusions towards the membrane, forming cilia and/or flagella, which relate to cell adherence and locomotion. Okay, Alex, you also need to keep in mind that in certain cells, such as plants, algae, fungi, and most bacteria, the cell membrane is actually surrounded by a strong barrier called the cell wall. That's right, Alex. The cell wall provides the cell with a rigid layer of protection, support, and shape to the cell. Now, cell walls are made up of various components depending on the cell type. For instance, in plants and algae, the cell wall is made out of cellulose, a carbohydrate. Now, fungi, on the other hand, their cell walls are made out of chitin, and in bacteria, they are made out of peptidoglycan. Now that you know the different types of organelles, let's determine which are membrane-bound and which are non-membrane-bound organelles. As you can see, the majority of the organelles that we discussed are membrane-bound organelles, meaning they have a membrane, some even double membranes that separate their contents from the cytoplasm. Take a look at the non-membrane bound organelles. These do not have membranes, hence their names. If you remember from our first discussion about prokaryotes versus eukaryotes, which ones do not have membrane bound organelles? Yes, that's right, Alex. Prokaryotes do not have membrane bound organelles, which means that they may have non-membrane bound, such as ribosomes, cell walls, flagellum, and of course the cytoplasm. Now, as for eukaryotic cells, well, they can have any of these organelles. Keep in mind that eukaryotic cells also differ between animal and plant cells. So let's take a look at some of the differences between the two eukaryotic cells. Plants, for instance, have chloroplasts and cell walls. They also have central vacuoles, whereas most animal cells contain many small vacuoles, lysosomes, flagellum, and centrioles. Now notice that both plant and animal cells consist of the mitochondria, which means that they both go through cellular respiration to release ATP. This concludes our virtual biology camp lecture on prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Well, that's it. Have a great one.